It's Metroidvania Works, and this is Montezuma's Revenge. In the wake of Pitfall's success, the concept of platform action games playing out in actual virtual spaces, rather than in abstract mazes of broken up flooring, took hold. It seemed like a perfect way to bring arcade-style action games to home systems, where the parsimonious nature of coin-op gaming didn't work. Arcade games were special and interesting because you had to pay for the pleasure of playing. Arcade games came with real-world consequences for failure. Losing the game meant you also lost 25 cents, which at the time was worth quite a bit more than it is now. This created a tension that couldn't exist in a home game. You'd already paid $20 or $30 for the privilege of owning that cartridge, so there was no way, at least in the halcyon innocent days before microtransactions, for developers to restrict players' actions with monetary implements.
Explain how. Money can be exchanged for goods and services.
Woohoo! So how do you create tension and replayability when there's no longer any money on the line? The best coin-op games created a sort of compulsive feedback loop where you'd lose, but immediately plunk down your next quarter in the feverish hope of making it just a little farther, or earning a few more points next time. Home conversions could get by on the drive to top a personal best score for a while, but even back on Atari 2600, programmers tended to add a lot of novelty features to keep things fresh. Think Space Invaders and its options to make enemies invisible or remove shields. Those were just a few of the concepts developers experimented with throughout the 80s, and their efforts to instill within players the same desire to keep plugging away at a home game as they experienced with the arcade coin drop endorphin loop. Some developers just went all in on insane difficulty levels to force players to perfect their skills painfully over the course of weeks or even months if they ever wanted to see the end. Others looked to Pitfall and began creating virtual spaces that beckon to players with secrets and a sense of place. Metroidvania Works is, of course, concerned with the latter, the exploratory platformers and action RPGs of history. And Montezuma's Revenge by Utopia was a critical milestone on the road to that glorious end. Montezuma's Revenge builds on Pitfall, there's no question about it. Here we have a run-and-jump platform game centered around the goal of collecting treasure while avoiding deadly traps and venomous creatures. There's a lot more going on here than in Pitfall, however, and in a far more memorable landscape. David Crane had had to work within the puny storage limits of the Atari 2600 in order to create Pitfall's world, which meant the entire thing consisted of hundreds of screens arranged in a straight line. Still, it was a remarkable hack that pushed the boundaries of the platform, there's no question about it. But Montezuma's Revenge's director, Robert Yeager, had the luxury of building on what had come before, not to mention the capacious memory space of a personal computer. While you're seeing the 1988 Master System version of the game here, Montezuma's Revenge originally debuted in 1984 on Atari 800, a far more powerful system than the 2600. While it was quickly scaled down to fit on consoles, even the 2600 ROM of Montezuma's Revenge is twice as large as Pitfall's. At the same time, the world contained within Montezuma's Revenge is smaller than that of Pitfall, a pyramid consisting of between 50 and 160 rooms, depending on the version of the game, versus the whopping 254 screens of Pitfall. Yeager's decision to create a smaller scale world than Pitfall's, despite the larger storage space available, worked to his advantage. It resulted in more varied screen layouts than in Pitfall, along with added mechanical complexity. Montezuma's Revenge quite likely owes a great debt to another game as well, Pharaoh's Curse by Synapse Software. Released in 1983 for Atari 8-bit computers, Pharaoh's Curse has a lot in common with Montezuma's Revenge. There you descend into a pyramid consisting of interconnected screens, loaded with danger, seeking treasures in the ancient tomb. But Pharaoh's Curse was tiny and simplistic compared to Montezuma's Revenge. A mere 16 rooms, with an inventory system that amounts to picking up a couple of keys scattered throughout the world in order to open specific doors. Montezuma's Revenge can be up to 10 times the size of that game, depending on the version, and there's a lot more going on here. It's also worth noting that Yeager's game does a better job of exploiting its setting too. Where Pharaoh's Curse took place in a pyramid built of a 4x4 grid of rooms, Montezuma's Revenge unfolds from the top of a Mesoamerican structure that widens as you descend. The top floor is simply one room wide, while the next level is 3 screens across, and the one below that is 5, and so forth. The pyramid also grows larger as you rise through the difficulty levels, with more rooms appearing and barricades being put in place to change your route through the existing rooms. This is a game that demands players map it out, something previously only seen in a dense PC RPG like Wizardry. Although there are no real RPG systems here beyond a basic inventory setup, the size and complexity of Montezuma's tomb gives a clear sense of where action games would be going in the coming years. Of course, Montezuma's Revenge is an action game designed in 1984, and that means it comes with all the attendant frustrations you'd expect. The play physics are stiff and uncooperative, to put it lightly, and your hero is tragically fragile. There's definitely a sense of Spelunker at work here, but Montezuma's Revenge is a much more complex game than that. The pyramid sprawls across its 100 or 160 screens through interconnected corridors that require backtracking, especially at the higher difficulty levels. More to the point, you have to juggle protagonist Panama Joe's limited inventory in order to advance. There are several items to collect here, ranging from a torch that lights up dark rooms to keys that unlock doors. You can also collect amulets and weapons to help fight back against the creatures that roam the pyramid. The downside is that Panama Joe can only carry a few items at once, so toting around a sword may seem all well and good until it prevents you from grabbing a key that you desperately need. To further add to the complexity of the adventure, this is one of the earliest games to color-code its keys. The keys here appear in blue, red, and cyan, and naturally, each one only works on a door of the appropriate hue. This creates a sort of interlocking puzzle element within the pyramid. Simply possessing keys isn't enough to advance past a door. You also need to find the proper key for the job. This forces you to be strategic about which items you collect, since you don't want to load down your inventory with keys that don't work on the available doors. I don't think it's possible to enter an unwinnable situation here, but certainly grabbing the wrong tools can be an inconvenience, forcing you to retrace your steps until you find the correct key. Look at that. We haven't even reached our first proper Metroidvania game, but already we're bumping up against the frustrations inherent in the format. The complexity of Montezuma's Revenge's pyramid layouts combines with the high difficulty level to create a game that requires a lot of determination to master. Even at its easiest, this is a daunting adventure in which you only have a few lives in order to complete a massive puzzle maze. There's a lot of exploration and collecting to be done here, and you can only afford to make a few mistakes in the process. Fall from too high a ledge, or fail to leap a monster with Panama Joe's clunky controls, or screw up the timing of running past a barrier, and boom, that's one life down. There's no shortage of invention with the hazards here. The different monsters demonstrate unique behaviors, ranging from mindless wandering to the spiders that can climb ladders, obstructing pathways and negating one of the player's key advantages. Taking a page from Spelunker, some versions of the game also introduce a stressful de facto timer to deal with on the higher difficulty levels. If you dawdle too long on a screen, a bat swoops down, much like Spelunker's ghost, and chases Panama Joe. This was a feature included in early prototypes of the game, which, along with a final encounter with Montezuma himself, was cut for space reasons. Montezuma appears in the ZX Spectrum version of the game, while the Master System release omits him but adds in the bats, along with more tools to use, along with more diverse enemies and hazards. But even in its basic original release, or even the compromised Atari 2600 version, Montezuma's Revenge is packed with impressively complex platforming puzzles. Combine the moving floors a la Donkey Kong's Cement Factory with vanishing blocks, together with the wandering enemies and key-based puzzles, and you have an intricate, innovative game that represents a huge step forward in platform game design. Although we're still clearly in the arcade era of video game thinking here, note the high difficulty and lack of continues, Montezuma's Revenge demonstrates a trend toward treating video game environments as persistent, deliberately designed spaces rather than merely abstract collections of floors and ladders. The shape and structure of the puzzly pyramid of Montezuma's Revenge offers us a glimpse into the future. As a footnote, it's also worth mentioning that around the time Montezuma's Revenge debuted in the US, the UK was taking its own steps in this direction. In 1984, Software Projects published Set Willy, which kicked off England's own interpretation of these concepts. The sequel to the Spelunker-like Manic Miner, Set Willy built on that earlier work by dropping players into a quote-unquote real space. In this case, the opulent mansion that Miner Willy had purchased with his earnings from his previous game adventure. While this was more of a pure platforming experience, lacking an inventory system or any power-ups to speak of, Set Willy nevertheless helped kick off an entire school of PC game design that would in turn inspire the UK's own particular brand of exploratory platformers. Next time, we'll circle back around to see what David Crane was up to while the industry he helped create was crashing around his ears.